Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. Owning a pickup truck means that friends and family feel as though they can ask you to help them move. And likewise, having computer knowledge means that friends and family want you to fix their computers. And sometimes we pay car mechanics, electricians, and plumbers without even thinking about it. But those with computer knowledge realize that folks think that having their computer fixed should be free or nearly free. So do you ever feel like unpaid customer support or the keeper of the magic beans? Well, tools like TeamViewer, AnyDesk, LogMeIn, and Chrome Remote Desktop are common for assisting users remotely. And so those are all commercial tools, and I've covered in the past Apache Guacamole, Remotely, and Rustdesk, which are open source tools that provide the ability to do remote assistance or remote control. So today I'm going to discuss a tool called MeshCentral. And MeshCentral is a terrific tool. It scales a little bit beyond what we see with the tools I mentioned earlier. So MeshCentral is a little bit different than the other tools that I've covered as self-hosted solutions. And part of the reason for that is because it is more robust in terms of remote monitoring and management. And it's really designed a little bit more for an enterprise type company or perhaps a managed service provider. And it supports both a resident or instance support client, the difference being that a resident client installs so that you can connect to systems whenever you want to, such as the systems you can see here on my MeshCentral dashboard. Whereas the instance support client is something that is loaded for a one-time support of a remote user that you're attempting to assist. So I really like MeshCentral for another reason, and the other reason is it uses web-based ports to host it, which are ports 443 and 80, unlike, say, Rustdesk, which uses a series of ports, and so it kind of broadens your threat surface as far as having an application running on your network. And so one problem with MeshCentral is it's not particularly straightforward to get it to run behind reverse proxy, such as Nginx Proxy Manager with the proper WebSocket support. And I'm going to cover that here today. And it integrates text and voice chat also. And so normally what I would do to support a remote user is I would start a Jitsi Meet session to have voice to discuss things, and then I would also team that up with Rustdesk. In this particular case, I imagine we can use MeshCentral as the single tool, and that makes it really nice. Another thing is that MeshCentral, unlike Rustdesk or Guacamole or really Remotely, all of those applications are most commonly installed as Docker applications, and MeshCentral is written in JavaScript runtime, and so we're going to install it with Node.js and Node Package Manager rather than implementing it in Docker. And so MeshCentral differs from Rustdesk in that it also provides terminal access as well as GUI access, and it's good for monitoring systems in addition to performing remote control. And so I think that this can be a really great tool in your home lab. As an example of how MeshCentral operates, I can go ahead and click on this Windows 11 RAIN instance, which happens to be a Windows 11 Incus virtual machine running on another system. And so here it gives me kind of a summary of that machine. I'll go ahead and blow this up a little bit so we can actually see what we've got here. I have the ability to go over to the desktop or a terminal. We can pick the desktop, and I can go ahead and click connect here once the system shows online, and it will go ahead and connect. I can make that full screen here by hitting the full screen option, and of course in the web browser I can go down and select the full screen option, making it really full screen. And so that's really great, and I can go up here and turn off the full screen and likewise do a disconnect and be right back here. As another example, I can go to the terminal on that same Windows 11 machine and do a connect, and I will get a Windows command prompt. If I head back up to the top level menu here, I can disconnect and go back up to my devices. The way that you can add devices is you can first of all create groups, and devices are contained inside of groups. And so you can see here that the looks like 6 devices that I have are all in a group called Scotti-BYTE support. And if I had a large number of systems, I could place them in different groups. So we have 2 options to add systems. One is add agent and the other is invite. Add agent simply means that we're going to add an agent on a remote system. And so we have a choice between Windows, Linux, and then they have a Linux binary installer. We have an Apple Mac OS installer and a mobile device installer. And then there's also a command line tool called MeshCentral Assistant. So as an example, if I said that I wanted to provide a Windows installation, I could say Windows, and then I could download the x86 32, the x86 64, or the newer Windows ARM image, and then I would take that over to the remote system and run it, and once I ran it, it would have what's called a resident agent running, and then the system would pop up here as one of the systems that I could manage. So the resident agent is really a great tool for managing systems inside your network, but what if you want to assist friends and family or somebody remote to your network? In order to do that, we would click on the invite option here. And when we click on the invite option, it provides a link, and you can specify how long that link is available for with a drop-down menu, and then you can specify which agents. I'll just go ahead and say all available agents, and then it asks you what type of installation type, and I'll just say background and interactive, meaning that I'm picking everything that I have out here. So I can click on the invitation link, and here it gives me all of the different installation types. So as an example, for Windows 64-bit, I could download the software here and click install or connect. And if I mailed the link here in my URL line, it would be mailing the link so that that end user would have the link in order to run the agent from their desktop as what's called an instant support agent. And then likewise for Windows 32, likewise for Windows on ARM, and then we have the Linux scripts, and that's just a very simple command line script that you can paste into a Linux machine. And then we have a binary installer for Linux, Mac OS installer, Mac OS ARM installer, and then we also have Android over here, which says go out to the Android store and download it. And then we have the command line assistant for Windows. So with that in mind, we can go over here and send a copy of this link over to my Windows system, and we'll see what happens when I connect to it. I've now sent this invitation over to the remote system, which is a Windows desktop elsewhere in the home lab. And so I can go back to this main screen, and here you see Windows 10 Pewter Room, which is the name of that Windows system there. And if I click on it, it will go ahead and show me information about it. It said it's a Windows 11 Pro. It was originally Windows 10 and had been updated. And it gives me information about it. And I can see things like details here where I can see which particular version it's running. And it's running Windows 11 Pro 23H2. It says it's connected. It gives me the IP address. It even gives me information about the BIOS and the motherboard. And for some reason, it disconnected right there. I'm not sure why. But I could go over here to desktop and I can click on connect. And likewise, it connects to that machine. So let's go ahead and blow this up just a little bit so you can see what the tool looks like over there by going full screen. And then over here, I'll go ahead and make the web tab full screen as well. And so this thing right here is the MeshCentral agent that I downloaded, and I simply ran it over there. It didn't go through any kind of an install. It just had a connect button, and I could go likewise click disconnect, and it would disconnect from that machine. And once it's disconnected, that machine actually goes offline and it disappears here because it's disconnected and it was an instant support agent. So therefore, it won't come back online until the person runs the app at that end and clicks connect. I'm going to install MeshCentral in an Incus container. You could certainly install it in a virtual machine as well. I'm doing an Incus launch on images Ubuntu 2404. I'm calling the name of my container MeshCentral. I'm using the default profile, and from my video entitled Incus Container Step by Step, we're using the bridge profile to present our MeshCentral instance with an address on our main LAN. And then I have boot.autostart equals to true, which means that anytime that the Incus server starts, the MeshCentral container will start as well. Now we're going to go ahead and do an Incus shell into MeshCentral. And when we're inside of a container for the first time, it's a best practice to go ahead and take all of the updates, and we do so with an apt update && apt upgrade -y, and you can see here that all of the updates have been applied. So we have some dependencies that we need to install in order to install MeshCentral, and those are the Nano editor. I'm also installing net-tools for convenience, and then once the server is installed, in order to do remote management, I am installing OpenSSH-server so I can SSH into the system. I'm also installing curl, wget, git, and build essential. And this installation may take a little while. Now that most of the dependencies are installed, I'm going to go ahead and add myself a user account, and I'll do an add user Scott. I'll provide Scott with a password, verify that password, and then I want to go ahead and add Scott to the sudo group with the user mod -a G sudo Scott. Let's SU over to the newly created Scott account, and we have to spell this correctly. So we'll do an SU space dash space Scott, and typing does matter. So now I want to go ahead and perform this curl command to begin to install node.js, and it will require my sudo password, and it will go off and get that. Let's install node.js with the sudo apt install node.js, and the -y is so that it doesn't ask me the question as to whether I want to install it. At this point, we have both node.js and npm installed, and we can test that by doing a node-v, and we're running node version 20.19.5. And likewise, we can do an npm-v, and that tells us that we're running npm version 10.8.2. To install MeshCentral in our Incus container, we're going to begin by doing a sudo makedir on /opt/MeshCentral. And I want to make that folder owned by my user account, and so I can use this command to do so, and the $user is a symbol in the OS that points to my current user account, meaning that that folder is now owned by user Scott. And then let's move over to that newly created folder with the cd /opt/MeshCentral. And now to install MeshCentral, all we need to do is a npm install MeshCentral. Let's create a configuration data folder by the name of MeshCentral-data, and now we need to configure the config.json file that MeshCentral uses for all of its data. I'm going to paste in the contents of this configuration file, which will be in the show notes, and let's go ahead and discuss this. First of all, we need to have our domain name, which you will have gone over to your domain name service provider and created a domain name for your instance of MeshCentral. For my testing purposes, I'm creating a name called test.scotti-BYTE.com, and I'm setting when only equals to true, port equal to 3000, the alias port equals to 443, and these settings are required for Nginx Proxy Manager to do things correctly. And then I have TLS offload equals to true, and that's because Nginx Proxy Manager needs to perform that function. And then I have admin can see all devices equals to true, and I found that that was required in order to be able to see all of the devices that I added, because by default it tends to hide things somewhat. The next two values, ignore web cert and ignore agent hash check, are both really important, and I found that was because MeshCentral really wants to be able to run independently and without having the Nginx Proxy Manager in the program flow in order to handle things like the Let's Encrypt certificates for SSL encryption. And this isn't a problem if you trust your local area network. And so then I have WebRTC equals to true, and I've set my web timeout at 6 million, or I think 60 million, no, 6 million, and that's 6 million milliseconds, which is really 60 minutes, because I got tired of the program timing out. And then under domains, we have a title and optionally a title too, and this is just the title of the program. So with that in mind, let's do a Control O and Enter to write the file out, and a Control X to exit the Nano editor. I want my MeshCentral to run as a service on my container that starts when the container starts. So I'm going to do a sudo nano on /etc/systemd/system and then MeshCentral.service. The contents of the service file are very straightforward, and again, they will be in the show notes. The only thing of real significance here is you're going to want to change your username equivalent to the username that we've been using all along here. I'll go ahead and do a Control O and Enter to write the file out, and a Control X to exit the service file. Now we want to go ahead and do a daemon reload, because anytime you change things in the service folder, you want to go ahead and reload systemctl daemon reload. Now that we've done that, I'm going to go ahead and enable our new service, because by enabling the service, that means that anytime the system boots, it will start the service. And for this particular instance here, I want to go ahead and start my MeshCentral right now instead of rebooting the container. So I do so with the sudo systemctl start MeshCentral. And now to see if our service is correctly started, we can do a sudo systemctl status on MeshCentral, and we can see here that it is loaded, active, and running. MeshCentral is pretty actively maintained and updated, and in fact this release was updated a week ago. And so if you want to update your version of MeshCentral, you can do so with the sudo npm install MeshCentral at latest, and that will go ahead and go out and update to the latest version of MeshCentral if there is one. And then assuming there was a new version, we'll want to go ahead and restart our MeshCentral service with the sudo systemctl restart MeshCentral. If you want to see what version of MeshCentral you're running, you can use the command npm list MeshCentral. And you'll see here that we're running version 1.1.50. Now we want to find out the address of our container, and we can do so with an if config. And the address of our container, in my case, is 172.16.1.183. Your address will, of course, differ. Here we are on my Nginx proxy manager, and I want to say add a proxy host. In my case, I'm going to add the host test.scotti-BYTE.com because that's the domain name that I have chosen for testing purposes. And that is the one that I created over on my DNS service provider, and it's also the one that I put in the json.config file. And then we want to indicate the forward address here, which was the address we just discovered, and that was 172.16.1.183. We want to set our forward port to 3000. Go ahead and block common exploits, and very important, turn WebSockets support to on. Let's go ahead and go over to the SSL tab and say request a new certificate, and I agree to the Let's Encrypt Terms of Service. Then head over to the Advanced tab, and we have some code that will be in the show notes that we want to paste in here. The important part of this code is that we want to have the proxy pass up here, have the 183 address or whatever your address is at port 3000. And then as we scroll down in this code, we also have another section with the proxy pass for the WebSocket code, and it has 172.16.1.183:3000. Again, your address will differ, and then we want to go ahead and click Save. That should go ahead and create a new Nginx proxy manager record by the name of test.scotti-BYTE.com in my case. And now if I scroll down the screen, I should be able to find test.scotti-BYTE.com, and if all is well, it should be online, and it is. And let's go ahead and click here and edit this, and then go over to the SSL screen, turn on Force SSL since we can't do that initially, and I'll go ahead and turn on HTTP/2support and click Save. At this point, I can go ahead and create myself a new tab in my web browser and connect to test.scotti-BYTE.com. And we get a splash screen here, and it says if you don't have an account, create one. So I'll go ahead and click Create, and I'll go ahead and type in vmsman@gmail.com, and I'll provide myself a password, and it says it's a weak password. Let's add something else to the end of it to see if we can make it less weak. And it says it is a good password now. And I'll go ahead and click Create Account. And that goes ahead and logs me in, and we have our banner that says Scotti-BYTE Test Portal. If I log out now, it will not give me the option to create a new account, and we don't really want that. The account will be under, or additional accounts, if you want them, will be under the control of the system administrator, which is really what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and type in my username of vmsman@gmail.com, and I'll go ahead and type in my password and go log in once again. To begin using MeshCentral, you must first of all click to create a device group. And you can call this anything you want. It's just a grouping to put machines in that you're going to control. So I'll go ahead and call this one Test Group in keeping with my test theme. And the type is Manage using a software agent or Intel AMT. And this is a good point in time to point out that if you have a hardware device that has Intel AMT baked into its ROM BIOS firmware, MeshCentral can connect to those devices without the need for a software agent. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and click OK to create my new group. MeshCentral is a really powerful tool, and it's more or less designed for a large, scalable enterprise installation, and it's really not designed to be positioned behind Nginx Proxy Manager. But with the Nginx Proxy Manager advanced code that I showed you, in addition with some settings in the JSON config file, I've gotten it to work properly over Nginx Proxy Manager. So just as a quick look here, we also have a settings area where it talks about your events and reports on what you have done since you brought the server up. You can also look at the files area where you can have files that you access in order to send over or receive to support a remote user. And then we have the concept of different users, and you can create new users if you like as well, and provide them access to support only selected devices on your network or other networks. So it's basically a privilege-based system. But here, by default, that first user you create is an administrator, and in my case, that's the only user that I have a need to create. And finally, you can go down to My Server, and it gives you a lot of information about backing up or restoring the server. So since I'm running this in an Incus container, I can take snapshots of that Incus container, or I can export that Incus container to have a complete backup of my MeshCentral installation. So in summary, I really like what I see through MeshCentral, and I had used MeshCentral a couple of years ago, but stopped using it because I had issues with getting it to work through Nginx Proxy Manager. And so in the interim, I was using other tools. One of them, for example, was Apache Guacamole, which is great for remote access, but it's not really good for remote assistance and screen sharing because that's simply not its use case. And then Remotely, made by the Immense Group, is a very powerful web-based application for remote assistance, but sometimes I have had problems with keyboard control and keyboard translation. And then there's Rustdesk, which has really been my tool of choice now for quite some time. And it really is an awesome tool, but it has no integrated voice capability. And that's what's caused me to use Rustdesk in conjunction with Jitsi Meet in order to support remote users. So MeshCentral is a very powerful and scalable tool that is completely web-based and can be used in the home lab and can also be used for remote assistance. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit your notification bell, and we'll see you next time.